On arrival at the Port Arthur historic site, we were amazed by the modern and spacious entry building. We also had no trouble finding a convenient park. Maybe it had something to do with the size of our Picanto. The volunteer staff were very helpful in telling us where to go, in the nicest way. These cards lead you to a file which identifies an individual convict with his particulars. This poor fellow was 16 years old and was sentenced to 10 years transportation for pickpocketing. Even after the 10 years, the convicts were not transferred back to England. They could go, but had to pay their own way. So most convicts were detained to spend the term of their natural life in the colony. Before entering the actual site, there are displays with artefacts, timelines and detailed stories to help prepare you to fully appreciate your visit. Of course, this is Tasmania. It was a cloudy day with occasional showers. There are many buildings on the site and some that no longer remain, but perhaps the most profound is the main penitentiary building. Radcliffe Creek drains the immediate area of Port Arthur into Carnarvon Bay. The penitentiary building was originally constructed as a flour mill and granary in 1845 in an effort towards a self-sustainable settlement. Grain was ground by either a water-powered mill or, when the water flow was inadequate, by convicts walking on a treadmill, one of the harshest punishments at Port Arthur. While the building was beautifully designed and one of the largest in the colony, the venture ultimately ended due to an insufficient water supply and competing priorities for space and industry. The mill lay empty until the need to house more convicts became pressing, and it was converted into the penitentiary between 1854 and 1857. It was then used to house prisoners until the settlement closed in 1877. The building was devastated by fire in 1897, leaving only the masonry walls and barred windows behind. The remaining walls are supported with steel reinforcing to prevent the possibility of further collapse. This building, while semi-detached to the main penitentiary, appears less daunting. In my notes and research, I couldn't find the actual purpose. Given the large rooms and fireplaces, I assume it was for administration or a rest area for the guards. This is an indication of how thick the walls are. The law court served as home to the rules and regulations of the settlement. It was here that the rules were outlined by a clerk of the day when convicts first arrived, and where punishments were ordered if a convict broke the rules. The guard tower was strategically situated overlooking the prison site. The soldiers there were responsible for security and for pursuing and capturing escaped convicts. I had to remove background sounds from most of this video for obvious reasons. A small number of soldiers were accompanied by their wives, who washed, sewed, and provided basic nursing care for the men in their husbands' company. Children of the soldiers, lower-ranking settlement officials and free staff were educated together in the nearby free school. Semaphore stations were used to send signals throughout the early colony. In stark contrast to other buildings on the site, the Commandant's house is an opulent and imposing monument to luxury and status. Even by today's standards, it appears comfortable and imposing. It was obviously intended to not only provide a professional standing for the Commandant, but to achieve reverential respect from the convicts. Even ranking officers would feel intimidated by the Commandant in the presence of such luxury. This is where the Commandant had his me time. There were obviously no shortage of goodies in this household. And an ample kitchen to make use of all those ingredients. no doubt staffed by trusted convicts. The police station was home to the township's policemen from 1936 to 1972. Trentham Cottage is a historic house located in Port Arthur. It was built around 1900 by the Trentham family and was lived in by them until 1920. It has been restored to show how it might have looked in 1915. The house and garden are open to the public and are well maintained. Soldiers Memorial Avenue is a commemorative walkway. It was created in 1918 to honour soldiers from the Carnarvon and Oakwood districts who died in World War I. The avenue consists of 17 trees, and later 21 more trees were planted to acknowledge other local men who had or were still serving overseas. The Port Arthur Lunatic Asylum was built in the late 1860s and was the last major structure to be built at Port Arthur before it closed in 1877. It was constructed to house convict lunatics and was paid for by the British government. The asylum originally had 4 wings radiating from a central dining room. The front of the building was trimmed with an open veranda which fronted onto a large fenced garden. It was flanked by a keeper's quarters and a bakehouse, both of which were L-shaped. To the rear was a long wooden building that served as accommodation for the asylum's more rowdy occupants. The asylum features a small museum and a coffee shop today. The separate prison was built between 1849 and 1850. Its architecture and regime were modelled on those used at Pentonville Prison in England. The prison had 4 wings radiating off a central area, which allowed for close and constant surveillance. The one-man cells were small. The prison was based on the principles of isolation, silence and control. The inmates of Van Diemen's Land's notorious separate prison at Port Arthur endured a silent, lonely, psychological torture. The Canadian cottage was originally called Port Lookout Cottage and was likely imported from Canada as a prefabricated building. It was moved to its present site in 1900 and renamed Canadian Cottage. It was never part of the penal settlement and when relocated was a private home and a craft shop. The Port Arthur entry fee includes a 20-minute harbour cruise, giving you another perspective on the site. If you were to head south from this point, the nearest land you would reach is Antarctica. Isle of the Dead is a small island located in the harbour of Port Arthur. It was used as a cemetery for convicts and civilians during the late 19th and early 20th centuries when Port Arthur was a penal settlement. Over 1,000 people are buried here. During its 15 years of operation, Port Arthur's dockyard produced 16 large deck vessels and around 150 small open boats. At its peak, more than 70 men worked here.
Tonight's terror in Tasmania. It was the worst gun massacre ever. No words can express the horror and disbelief in this little Tasmanian tourist centre tonight.
The worst massacre by a single civilian in world history.
There is still no motive, no inkling as to why the gunman visited this horror on a quiet Tasmanian community.
The sudden and appalling slaughter now added
to the region's already dark history.
Just gunshots.
Thanks, right. I'm pretty sure someone's got a gun. I can be bloody positive of it. There's somebody going crazy shooting people here.
Martin Bryant's murderous spree began at approximately 1 p.m. on the 28th of April 1996 at the Broad Arrow Cafe and ended at the Seascape bed and breakfast property, also situated at the town of Port Arthur, at approximately 7:45 a.m. the following morning. At the end of his rampage, 35 people lay dead and a further 24 were wounded. Bryant had just completed a meal at the cafe, after which he produced an AR-15 assault rifle, which he had carried in a sports bag, and began shooting at everyone in the cafe. He then moved to the gift shop, killing several more people. While in the shop, he calmly reloaded his weapon and continued firing. While in the cafe and gift shop, he fired a total of 29 shots, killing 20 people and wounding 12 more. Several people were hit with the same bullet. Others were injured by bullet shrapnel. He then moved to the car park area and pursued people in and out of parked coaches as they attempted to hide. The stories of how he methodically shot people as he walked around and how they died are horrendous. He then changed his weapon to a 7.62mm L1A1 self-loading rifle, after which he got in his car and headed back towards the Seascape B&B, where his rampage began earlier in the morning when he had shot and killed the two owners. Further people were killed on his way, including a mother and her two daughters, aged 6 and 3. He was captured the following morning after setting fire to the B&B building. Bryant was ultimately sentenced to 35 life terms, plus 25 years for a string of other offences, including wounding of the 24 people. He is currently imprisoned at Risdon Prison Complex in Hobart and will never be released.